Okay, so now that we know kind of the formal definition of what a sample space is, that it's a set of all possible outcomes of an experiment, that's very loaded with math jargon. Now let's make sure we can actually just write these out. Okay, so let's write out the sample spaces for these three experiments that I said before. So rolling a die. Okay, let's just start from there. So rolling a die. Again, if I write this curly brace as two pieces, it's a lot easier. So I could get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 on regular die. So that's my sample space. I didn't list anything more than once, and I've got every single thing that could possibly happen when I roll a single die. Okay, so now let's suppose we assign people to receive a treatment or a placebo. All right, these cancer patients either get a treatment or placebo, and then we want to see if they go into remission or not. All right, well, one way I could do this, just to kind of make sense of how I'm going to write out the sample space, is with what's called a tree diagram, and I'll do a little bit more of this in a different video. But the main idea here is that if I start at the base here and consider the first thing that could happen, which is they either get the treatment or they could get the placebo. And then in the next step after that, right, so if they got the treatment, from there they could have gone into remission, or, I don't know, I'll just say in for not in remission. I don't know. And same thing if they got the placebo, they could go into remission or not. All right, so now that I've written this out in terms of individual steps of they either got the treatment or placebo, and then knowing, you know, which branch they were on of getting the treatment or placebo, whether they get remission or not for each one of those two possibilities, we can write out a sample space. And I'm just going to go one by one down each of these four possibilities that we've actually had here. So someone could have gotten a treatment and gone into remission. So I would treat it like this: treatment and remission, treatment and no remission. Or they could have gotten the placebo and gone into remission, and they could have gotten the placebo and no remission. So these are the actual four things that could have occurred in that experiment, right? One thing the experimenters controlled, and one thing that the actual just, you know, what happened with the patient, right, that we have to passively observe here. That's kind of going beyond the scope of what I want to talk about in this video. I just want to make sure that we could write out a sample space for something like this and recognize that sometimes these events that we're interested in are really like two things happening at once. And that's allowed. That's okay. So this would just be the four real things that could happen here. And let's take a look at the very last one. Asking classmates what their favorite subject is in college. Okay, well, there's a lot of subjects. I'm not always going to be able to write out, I mean, suppose they went to another school that has a subject we don't even have here, right? I literally really can't make this list, right? And some places are going to call it one thing, and other places are going to call it another thing, right? Some other college may have a major in underwater basket weaving, like whatever. So sometimes I will be able to very clearly and cleanly write out what it is that could happen here, right? Like I could, if I flip a coin, it'll be either heads or tails. If I flip two coins, I could get heads on both. Heads on the first, tails on the second. Tails on the first, heads on the second. Or both of them could be tails. Right? I could write it out like that. I can sometimes write this out. Sometimes it'll be so tedious to write out that I won't want to, right? Like how many what the outcomes would be if I flipped a coin 1,000 times, right? That would be incredibly tedious to write out. I'm not going to do that. And that's okay, right? That doesn't make it not my sample space. Sometimes I just care about how big that sample space is. So that will be something we deal with when we get to something called counting rules. And as I said, sometimes these sample spaces will be simple to write out, and that'll enable us to get our probabilities very cleanly and easily. And other times we'll have to just say, well, this is how many things would be in that sample space. And that will be a completely different approach that we'll have to get to later. But in any case, this is actually how you write them out. Don't forget they need to be curly braces, not parentheses. And that we need to make sure everything is listed that could possibly happen. And I've only listed things the one time, right? Because it's going to be important, right? If I want to find out the probability that we get an even number, well, there's 2, 4, and 6 are even. Those are 3 things out of 6 possible things. So the probability that I get an even number is 3 things out of 6 things. It's that easy to actually write these probabilities out when I have a sample space. But if I've written out my sample space incorrectly, right, like I accidentally, as I was writing this, I accidentally included 2 twice. Well, now it looks like I have 7 things instead of 6 things. That's why we have this strict rule about only listing things the one time, is making sure that I don't accidentally double count things. And it would also make it look like my probability of getting 2, right, because 2 is now listed twice, it makes it seem like it's twice as big as the other numbers. So just be mindful of that as you write these out. Everything's got to be there, and it should only be there one time in order to actually be a real sample space.